It's not easy to become sane. It's not easy.
It goes on endlessly. The questions, the drugs, the questions, the torture machines. And
1984 has indeed finally arrived, only it's some remixed New Millennium version of Babylon speak a la 2000 1984.
We can.
1984. Totalitarian techniques to their terrible extreme.
It's an administration of high secrecy, ignoring every basic citizen's right of information access under FOIA by deliberately refusing to enforce decades-old laws at the federal level, which of course makes it impossible for similar laws then to be enforced at the local and state levels. And for the first time in U.S. history, by using the very clauses of the congressional legislature as evidential quote-unquote facts in order to garner support for this nation's first preemptive strike. As a result, it's even more difficult then to decipher what information is credible and reliable and which is bogus. There are investigative committees such as the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, the Presidential Studies Quarterly, who are fact-checking all of these claims, and frankly, the honesty of the Bush administration is shaping up to be something even more sinister than the shadiest dirty tricks of the Nixon administration. At least Nixon was flouting international law in an attempt to stop a war with his secrecy, not to start one.
War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
1984. But how do I know? How can I be certain that that is 1984? No, it must be. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. The party can thrust its hand into the past and say of this or that event, it never happened.
It is not a likable story, and one may hope and even believe that it is not a likely story either. But when we think of all that has happened throughout the world during our own lifetimes, it does not seem quite an impossible story.
There's a reflexive rationale regarding the so-called evidence on Iraq.
1984.
They can make you say anything, but they can't make you believe it.
I encourage every patriotic American citizen to read George W. Bush's report in connection with the presidential determination under Public Law 107-243 in order to comprehend firsthand the distortions of the Bush administration in claiming that Congress purportedly uncovered evidence that Iraq was continuing to aid and harbor international terrorist organizations threatening the safety of American citizens. This evidence somehow being the whereas statements Congress wrote in the Iraq War Resolution, which of course was made in response to the Bush administration's request for a formal determination to go to war against Iraq. It's circuitous logic at best, but of course, based on this sort of public record, the violations of Bush, Cheney, Ashcroft, Powell, Rumsfeld, Wolfowitz, and Rice stand out clearly as conspicuously distorted, manufactured, and deceptively untrue.
The party says, reject the evidence of your eyes and ears. It is the final, most essential command.
1984.
It's true. In order for democracy to prevail, citizens must not only be able to participate in government, but to be guaranteed that legal checks and balances counter otherwise hidden agendas. Right now, the U.S. is suffering under an administration that admonishes that tradition, that seeks to disrupt the legality of checks and balances as often as possible, using as many convoluted loopholes as possible to achieve its ends in the best of circumstances, and in the worst, deliberately manufacturing so-called evidence in order to lead nations to war. And that consistently misinforms the press, the public, and apparently congressional leadership.
What might conceivably happen if all the worst features that exist anywhere in our modern world were to prevail over all the others? And if, in addition, all these worst features were to spread all over the earth? 1984. 1984.
We can.
War, says Mr. Orwell, is not all, nor is it quite the worst imaginable thing.
There's no doubt that the environmental and energy policies of this administration are being unleashed with terrorist zeal only by our government against its own people. The most horrific part of the nightmare, of course, is the fact that America's citizens won't wake up to legislative reality, and that's really what's going to be required of a nation capable of reclaiming democracy in its homeland.
Today, no one is so naive as that. Indeed, the crisis of our civilization is in some danger of becoming a cliché of 1984.
Well, comparatively speaking, Nixon, who called environmentalists clowns and their programs crap, and those are quotes, could have run on the Green Party ticket in respect to the way his administration handled environmental issues versus the policies of the Cheney-Bush junta. Their shell game of requiring laws to be enforced at the state and local levels means nothing when they simultaneously refuse to enforce laws at the federal level, which could then, of course, allow state and local laws to possess genuine legal force. Having completely gutted the Clean Air and Clean Water Acts, which, by the way, were originally Republican-led administration initiatives, as well as employing their own biostitute scientists to cite so-called evidence that global warming might not be a genuine environmental issue, the actions of the Bush White House are akin to acts of eco-terrorism against U.S. citizens and nations of the world facing serious threats as a result of global warming, and Japan is only one of them.
Nothing is illegal since there are no more laws.
We can.
The average American not only does not understand the alleged differences between the two major political parties, but even worse, typically fail to understand policy decisions, voting records, party platforms. For the same reason, this combined lack of knowledge and failure on the part of the mainstream media to clearly explain these issues, most Americans don't even realize that the United States is currently the only country across the globe that has been brought up on charges by the World Court of inciting acts of international terrorism, as well as aiding and abetting known terrorists. Saddam Hussein, Osama bin Laden, the Taliban, they are all former recipients of U.S. military training and defense spending. How is it possible that the U.S. can simultaneously be the world's leader in terrorist activities at the same time it's waging a so-called war on terrorism? As Noam Chomsky called it, that's distorted morality.
War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
1984, but don't give up hope. Everyone is cured sooner or later. In the end, we shall shoot you.
The plight of the individual in this world, we leave you to assess for yourselves.
If you can feel that staying human is worthwhile, even when it can't have any result whatever, then you've beaten them.